I'm going to talk about some of the work in a more kind of plural way, in that I'm talking about Sandra's process, the way she approached her painting, etc. And I want to start with this painting. This is one of the last paintings Sandra made. It's called Linear Perspective, and it was completed quite soon before the RA Summer Show of 2006, which of course was the year she died, in her 81st year, as many of you will know. Sandra died on the 22nd of August 2006, and I actually had a call from the wife of my friend, the abstract painter John McLean, who knew of my huge admiration for Sandra Blow's work, to say, we've got news that Sandra has died and we thought you'd like to know. And John then wrote a section of Sandra's obituary, which is online, it's wonderful, which appeared in The Guardian on Wednesday the 23rd of August, so very soon after her death which came quite suddenly. On the following day, Thursday the 24th of August that year, there were 3 letters about Sandra Blow in The Guardian on the obituary page. One of them was by Norman Rosenthal, one by James Scott, and the other one, which was the head, the lead letter, was from yours truly, and I'm going to read it. It's quite short. A great fan of the work of Sandra Blow, I was lucky enough to meet her on several occasions, most recently in St Ives one evening last March. Invited with my friend Jamie Collins for a cup of tea, we were shown into the studio and asked our opinions on 2 huge canvases, works in progress, which Sandra was urgently trying to complete for the RA Summer Show. Jamie suggested that he hold up an element of collage in front of one of the canvases for Sandra to assess. In doing so, he set in train what became for us a 2-hour session as impromptu studio assistants come creative advisors. Sandra issued responses and instructions from one end of the studio. Much of that was on a kind of daybed, incidentally. As Jamie and I moved up and down a ladder, staple gun and bits of paper and canvas in hand. We never did get a cup of tea, but it did not matter. We were like kids in the proverbial sweet shop. I nearly said sweatshop. Slip of the tongue. Our visit provided a privileged insight into Sandra's working process. As she responded to the work in progress, charming us and darling us, we became party to the rigour with which she approached her painting, with its thrilling sense of flexibility and experiment. Despite being in her 81st year, she was still girlish and so full of life. So much still seemed possible. She was a truly life-affirming artist, a one-off. And I'm sure, I feel quite moved reading that now, to which one could say, don't be such a sentimental old Queen, Massey, but I'm a massive fan, and I was so thrilled to meet her. And I know many of the people here who knew her will appreciate where that kind of sentiment comes from, even though I can't pretend to have known her much at all. I was just very privileged in that I met her twice in her studio, and once at the Tate in London when they had the show there for her 80th birthday, and then at a gallery opening as well. Anyway, this is the painting that Jamie and I worked on that evening. And my great friend Jamie is at home in Manchester, not able to be here, but I know he'd be thrilled to bits if he could be here. We went to London, to the RA Summer Show, where this hung with 2 other paintings, all of them of a similar scale. And we couldn't really recognise the painting from the evening that we'd spent there. It had gone through quite a lot of change. But nonetheless, our DNA is in there somewhere, I think in this top right corner in particular. But I think what this painting and all of the work here, all of which produced between 1987 and 2006, all of it does, to my mind, exhilaratingly, is show her process, her working methods. And what I so like about Sandra's work, well, there are many things, but I like the fact that the evidence of the facture, if you like, is there in the finished work. I came the other day with David, my partner, and our friend Linda, who is here, to look at the work, and I was just very struck looking at this painting and others, how, you know, there are bits of masking tape, bits of drawing, here a kind of cross where perhaps something was going to happen and then didn't. But that was left in as the evidence of this process, this working method that Sandra employed, and that it becomes part of the work, it becomes part of the life of the work. And I think that's terribly important and very kind of distinctive to Sandra's work. I have a few notes that I'm going to refer to. Yeah, all of the work in this space where we're at the moment was produced in the last 20 years of her life. She was born in 1925, so the painting behind us, the first painting, Swimmer, from 1987, was made by a woman in her early 60s. And I think it's important to recognise that the work here was made by an artist, a female artist, working in the last 20 years of a comparatively long life, and that her ambition and her drive and her pure delight in painting continued right through to the end. I know that Paul Armitage is here tonight, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, Paul, but I know that you worked with her as her studio assistant for a long time, and you may want to contribute later on. If you've looked at the DVD, which is available in the shop here, which was produced, I think, in the May of the year that Sandra died, you'll see sections where Paul is working with Sandra in the studio. So, I want to move on. Briefly again, this evidence of the process and the making in Sandra's work, the thing that I referred to earlier about the staple gun. Jamie and I were up and down. If you've been to Sandra's studio, and you can go for a tour, which John and Denny can organise for you, the step ladder is still there. And I saw it again the other day. And this idea that, you know, the staple gun, as much as the paintbrush and so on, was an integral tool in making this work. I was struck the other day looking at this wonderful painting over here, Brilliant Corner, that in one of the elements of collage there are still quite a few staples holding it in place. And again, not every artist would have done that. A lot of people would have taken them out. But again, it's part of, it's a kind of insouciance, I think, but it's far more than that. It comes perhaps from that early kind of apprenticeship she had with Alberto Burri, that use of materials that was very hands-on, that came out of Art Informel, Art Povera. But it also seems to me to be part and parcel of a kind of truth to materials ethos of modernism, this use of collage, this use of material that's very kind of self-evidently itself. Nothing is polished, nothing is overdone, and yet the work is still just extremely sophisticated. I want to move on now to talk a little about these paintings, which it strikes me that amongst the paintings here, these are perhaps amongst the more visceral. The one on the left is titled after Dante, Selva Oscura, The Dark Wood, 1993. It strikes me that there's a massive amount of energy, a kind of emotional energy contained within that work. And I think there's something about Sandra's work that perhaps hasn't been written about particularly. I'm sure it's been commented on, but not necessarily written about particularly, and that is the emotion in the work, the emotional quality in the work. It strikes me that a great deal of the criticism, the writing about the work has been about the formal qualities, about technical matters, about the aesthetics of the work, about how it relates to both European and American abstraction and modernism, all of which it does. I think it's a kind of bridge between European abstraction and American abstraction, in fact, of which I perhaps will return later. But when David, Linda and I came here the other day, Linda and I were looking at this painting, Helix, which was produced in 1990. Now, I wrote a small essay, which is in the catalogue, which accompanies this show. And although I'd seen most of the paintings here before, either in the studio or in exhibitions at the Tate and or the Fine Art Society in London, when it came to writing the essay, I did that at home in Manchester, and I was working with JPEGs on my computer screen. And they were very good quality JPEGs, but still, as you'll appreciate, nothing can really quite replicate that experience of looking at the work. And with this painting, I couldn't quite figure out just how these sections of canvas were applied. And it was only when I came in the other day and looked that I could see that they're very gently folded, these flaps of canvas, quite gently folded and adhered in a kind of gentle way. Some of them seem to be partially falling away. Some of them, as I said, are held in a very gentle fold. And Linda and I were looking at this painting, and I said how red this, how bloody rather, the red appeared in this painting. Very struck actually, when you get close to it, that these little dilute splashes are almost like blood stains. And Linda said something. She said, yes, it's menstrual. And I immediately thought, my God, yes, that makes absolute sense. And then I thought, perhaps it needed a woman to articulate that, and maybe a fellow artist. Linda is an artist, as you will know. And then we were talking later, and I suddenly thought to myself, of the writing on Sandra Blow, certainly the more substantial texts, they have predominantly been written by white, middle-class, straight men. And it's not to denigrate any of them. I mean, you'll know who some of them are. I mean, Andrew Lambeth, Michael Bird, who wrote the substantial monograph on Sandra, Mel Gooding, who wrote a wonderful essay for the Tate St Ives show some years ago now. Fantastic. Wonderful writing, very sensitive, very acute. But I thought to myself, yeah, actually, the critical responses by women seem to be very thin on the ground. And it struck me that, in hindsight now, and when one starts to look, not only at Sandra Blow's work, in fact, but, you know, maybe it's now time to look at the work differently and establish other kinds of reading beyond the kind of reading that deals with the formal, the aesthetic, the technical, etc., etc. I'm struck also that, I mean, I'm terribly interested, in fact, in the way in which artists encode elements of themselves in their work. When I wrote about Keith Vaughan, certainly, I was very interested in the way that he, as a gay man and artist, encoded his feelings in the work. And so looking at Sandra Blow's work, I'm always interested in that as well. Not only in the formal, the technical, etc., but those kind of readings, those kind of meanings that might be there. So without harking on beyond that, I just feel it's quite interesting to look at these paintings, not just as incredibly impressive gestural abstractions, but perhaps as some paintings which are about something deeper, something more personal. Sandra was famously very discreet. In fact, the letter which Norman Rosenthal wrote to The Guardian, which was printed on the same day as my own, he wrote, "Though Sandra Blow's work was bold and ambitious, she was an intensely vulnerable individual in her relationships, about which she was very discreet." And it strikes me that perhaps one way of dealing with those, and of course she wouldn't be on her own with this, is to paint through some of those kind of vicissitudes, really, of her personal and private life. These two paintings clearly establish a very different mood. These paintings are altogether more tranquil. This one named after Porthmuir, the beach. And in the film about Sandra, I think she talked about this one. She talked about this as one of her absolute favourites, I think. And she talks about this green as a very thin cucumber. I do think that's an incredibly beautiful painting. I'm reminded that Mel Gooding wrote very beautifully about it in that Tates and Ives catalogue essay. There's a kind of a very particular ethereal atmosphere there. And I think that Sandra said that it was based on forms in the sand on Porthmuir Beach. It's clearly based, though, on some kind of landscape structure, I think, and incredibly beautiful. The one on the left strikes me. I've written in the catalogue essay that it's as though a modernist grid is appearing within sections of a decaying fresco, and I very much like this treatment of this very kind of strict, rigorous grid with these patches of colour that look like they could be the plaster from a decaying fresco. Those tilted squares of white, which are very kind of gentle, very, again, quite ethereal. I'm sure that this is very much about light and prismatic light and light passing across the surface of the canvas. And I'm reminded, in fact, we have some of Sandra's work at home. I have a 4-foot square canvas, which isn't utterly unlike this, and it hangs in our sitting room at home. And when the light comes through the bay window and the reflections of the leaves are on it, and they shift, it kind of emphasizes what the painting is about, which is about flux and transience, I think, and the effects of light. And again, I think that flux and transience is kind of at the core of Sandra's work, really. She was clearly deeply inspired by her surroundings, by landscape. She wrote about being in London. As you know, she spent many years in London, and the architecture and the trees and the foliage in London inspiring her. But I'm sure that when she returned to the much more elemental landscape and environment of Cornwall, that was emphasized hugely. I'm struck that, I mean, this painting was called Swimmer, and I think for all that Sandra was an abstract painter, that is surely the figure of a swimmer, this abstracted white configuration at the top, and then these very kind of phallic waveforms bounding in, very much man or woman against the elements.